to this edition of IAMPETH's Inside the Penman Studios. I'm very glad and fortunate to have with me as my guests today, Irene and Dan Calendo, two of my favorite people in IAMPETH. And Irene in particular and Dan knew me before I sort of, was really involved with calligraphy as I was a novice up in Rochester, New York. So thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me, and I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Let me start with Irene. Irene, when did you first become interested in penmanship and the calligraphic arts?
Well, I always loved handwriting. And I can remember even when I was on the phone as a young girl, I used to always write names. And I always admired, good handwriting, which there was a lot of it at that time. And then as I grew older, I continued to enjoy handwriting and penmanship. And then I was very fortunate because I was able, and I still do, teach in the schools when someone requests that I would help them out or teach the children. I always noticed that fourth graders improved very quickly.
So it was handwriting you became interested in, not necessarily text lettering or anything like that. It was
right,
handwriting.
handwriting.
And let me add something for our membership. I should have said this before, just to give you a sense of how important this was to both Irene and Dan. Irene has been a member for 40 consecutive years of IAMPETH. She's come to 40 consecutive IAMPETH conventions. And Dan is just a little shy of that at about 39. And so this art form and this group, IAMPETH, has been a big player in their lives, and they've also been incredible supporters of it. So it's hard to find anybody even married that long. And so I really appreciate their company and their support of this wonderful organization. Irene and Dan were both past presidents of this group, and
yes.
we'll get to that in a minute. When did you become involved with, let's say, other things like maybe pointed pen, the scripts and embroidery script and things like
right.
that? When did that happen?
Well, I wasn't introduced to that until I attended my first convention in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Okay.
And I was so fortunate to have met Mr. Yamaguchi was there from Japan, and Ray Caston, who
right.
worked for the city of Los Angeles for 43 years.
Yes.
Mr. Roy Manley, and he's the one that I worked with at every convention privately on penmanship, handwriting, and ornamental writing. And that's when I really and truly got so excited about that. So when I came back home to Rochester, I was fortunate that one of the teachers saw this article that I had in the newspaper and invited me to give a talk and presentation to 3 third-grade classes. So that was the start.
Okay. And let me move on to Dan now. Dan, when did you first become interested in penmanship and calligraphy and the pen arts?
I became as an accident.
Okay.
This goes back many years ago. This was at Halloween, and we were giving out the treats for the children.
Okay.
And the both of us were doing it, and I said, well, there's no need for both of us to be giving out the gift. He says, show me what you do with this handwriting thing, because I couldn't understand how anyone could be so engrossed in handwriting.
No pun intended.
I said, as long as it's legible, what's the difference? So she gave me a few lessons, and I was practicing that while she was giving out the treats. And eventually, I got to like it. My handwriting improved, but I didn't do too well in some of the ornamental scripts that she was showing me, and I was almost ready to quit. I said, this is ridiculous, So then I saw the broad pen, and I started working with the broad pen, and I found that it came to me a lot easier. And so I kept practicing and practicing, and I got to like it, and I stayed with it. And then as time went on, I gradually started doing some of the script and the ornamental. I'm still not as good at it as she is, but at least I tried.
Yeah, when you were a boy, were you trained with handwriting, like in a Palmer method, or Zane? What do you remember when you were early
No,
education?
I had no proper training in handwriting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I started out learning to print.
Gotcha.
And then eventually I just learned watching other people do their cursive writing, and then I just picked up a little bit of that, and that was it.
So your entry into this has been through your wife?
Mostly through her,
serendipitous,
right.
almost, right. Okay, great. When did you guys become involved? Now, obviously I expect you were 40-year members and things like that, but how did you first become involved with IAMPETH? How did that happen? How did you hear about it, you know?
Oh, this woman had lessons in her home, Frances Hill, and that was many, many years ago. And Dan was very excited and happy for me because I attended my first convention in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Right.
And after that, I just got involved, and Dan was so excited too. And then Walter Filling took me under his wing, and he did work for the White House and Justice Department and the Supreme Court. And every time I went to Washington for lessons in engraver script, Dan would give me his work, and Walter would critique it and send it back. And that's how we really got started. And then it was all through news releases. I never really promoted myself, but people knew what I was doing, and they invited me to the schools to give.
How did you actually get interested? How did you find out about IAMPETH? And how did you?
Through this lady, Mrs. Hill.
Okay.
And yes, that's how I found out about it.
And did you find out and then immediately join and attend the convention? Did you join?
Oh, I joined before. Oh, I joined right away when she introduced
So
me.
how long from the time you joined did you attend your first convention? Was it within a year?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so it was about the 40
Yes, I was
years ago.
so excited about that. And Dan and I had never taken a vacation separately, but he encouraged me, and I did go.
And then the following year, you were able to drag him there, huh?
Yes.
So she was responsible not only for you
Right.
getting involved in calligraphy and penmanship and the penmanship arts, but also for joining IAMPETH.
Right.
Couldn't say no to her, huh?
No.
No.
And and also, the other thing that's really important to mention here is that you guys have been, such strong supporters, and your influence as both past presidents, and you're so actively involved with the organization. I mean, IAMPETH has been a better organization for it. We do appreciate that. Is there anything you'd like to add? I know you have some involvement with the Japan Penmanship Association.
Yes.
And for those of our members who don't know about this group, this is a group, obviously located in Japan, but they do work that is very, very reminiscent of the stuff you would see in the Zenarian manual. And the first time I seen it, I was actually pretty startled by it. I couldn't believe it. And their membership still does fantastic work. And we do maintain an active bridge to Japan. Some of their members actually come. In the 2011 convention, we actually have a woman who came from Japan in for the convention. So the IAMPETH, which stands for International Association of Master Penmen Engrossers and Teachers of Handwriting, truly has an international flavor to it. And thanks to the efforts of Irene, we really have been able to maintain our connection with them. And tell me, have you ever been there? Have you ever visited them?
I was the first member of IAMPETH to ever attend the Japan Penmanship Association convention.
Do you remember what year that was?
1979.
Okay.
And I was president of our Rochester local group at that time. And they were so wonderful to me, and their work was unbelievable. And I gave a talk to the public. I had an interpreter. And
I'm assuming, Dan, you were there with her?
No, I
Did you
was
go?
not. She,
Okay.
we stayed home with our 3 children. And then they were just, it was unbelievable. Mr. Takahashi went out and bought a Western bed, and the letter he wrote and invited me, I could never have said no. And then Mr. Yamaguchi, we stayed at the hotel in Ashikaga City, where the convention was.
Okay. And if, again, for our audience, you know, the two people she just mentioned were, you know, had incredible hand skill. I mean, they were pretty much at the level of Zenarian masters and, you know, past masters from the past. And it's, as I said, for myself, it was pretty startling to see that because, you know, they were so far ahead of other stuff I had seen, you know, by just the calligraphy folks I came in contact with. Of course, when you come to IAMPETH, and then you see a different level of work being done. So, and they were very receptive to your being there. And,
definitely.
So, when you went there, was it just, you know, was it just interest in the, let's say, engraver script? Did they have an interest in penmanship as well?
Yes, Mr. Takahashi spoke English, still does, of course, and he, like I said, you know, invited me to their home, but then the convention was not there. It was where Mr. Yamaguchi was. And I loved all the writing. And Mr. Asao, who was the world's greatest flourisher, he was there. I met him. And Mr. Moriyoshi at that time was the world's greatest ornamental writer. So I had a lot of helpful hints from them.
And they were kind enough, when I've contacted them, they sent me a book with their writing in it, an orange-covered paperback
Yes.
book. And one of the interesting things for me was to find out that in the history of ornamental penmanship, one book is always pointed to as being really, really significant, and that's the New Spencerian Compendium. And that was printed, that was put out by the Spencerian, what they call Spencerian authors, people like Lyman P. Spencer, and people like Flickinger, who was responsible for some of the letter forms. That book is highly prized. The original copy, IAMPETH actually has a copy of that book. However, the Japan Penmanship Association reprinted the book exactly, and even the copy of that book has brought in as much as $400 in the past. And these are treasures, and they're things that are not, you can't buy that book any longer. They put a certain number of them, and but it was really fascinating. That's how I learned about them, through you.
Yes.
And to join, to actually get the Yoshodo is their, you know, journal. How often does the Yoshodo come out?
4 times a year.
4 times a year, okay. And it's actually a pretty minimal fee to actually receive. And what is the membership, what is the subscription fee to the Yoshodo?
$15.
15 US dollars.
For many, many years.
Right.
And they're losing a lot of money because
Right.
the postage is so
Yes.
high.
So we are, you know, and as a group, we sort of have, you know, close ties, and it would be nice if we were sort of closer together and easier to get to, because I personally would love to go to one of their conventions.
Oh.
And but my work schedule is such that it doesn't necessarily permit that.
I'd like to add a note here, that something interesting about Irene going there, and that she was a woman. And at that time, the Japanese Penmanship Association did not have any women in it.
It's changed recently,
It
right?
sure
Yes,
is.
it has changed now, right. But it was something that they would invite a woman to go and talk to their organization when there weren't any women associated with their penmanship association. So,
Right. Very interesting stuff. Listen, I would like to thank you personally for agreeing to speak with me and to allow our membership to hear your experience in the group. Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate it. Irene, thank you so much. I
You're
appreciate
welcome,
it.
Joe. Thank you.
Pleasure as always, and thank you for all your contribution to the group. I do appreciate it. Thank you, audience. Bye-bye.